Hello and welcome to another 10 rows a day tutorial. In this video I'll show you how to make stockinette stitch that doesn't curl. Stockinette stitch is one of the most popular stitches in knitting, but all knitters know its tendency to curl at the sides and curl at the bottom and the top, and that's quite annoying. In this video I'll show you how to make a version of a stockinette stitch that, as you see, does not curl. Just compare these two swatches. None of them is blocked, so it's just off the needles, and you can see the difference. This version stays flat, and this one obviously curls a lot. This stitch is worked with two strands of yarn held together. That's like a secret recipe for this little trick. And because we're using two strands, we can easily use two strands of different colors and create a colorful stitch. And for this demonstration, I'm going to use two colors of the yarn because it will be easier to show how the stitches are worked with two colors. I cast on 6 stitches, and I highly recommend to use bigger size of needles for this stitch. I'm using yarn that is worsted weight, and I'm using 2 strands of it, and the needle is quite big. It's 8 millimeters US size 11. So stick with bigger needles. This way you will have better results. And let's get to it. So cast on any number of stitches. There are no multiples because it's stockinette, right? And for the knit row, I'll get another needle. For the knit row, first separate 2 strands of the first stitch like this, and insert the right needle into just one of the strands. The usual way, as if you're knitting it, because you are knitting it. And knit the stitch with 2 strands of yarn through just one strand of the stitch. That's going to be our first stitch. That's it. Now spread the 2 strands of the next stitch and insert the needle into the first strand of the next stitch and the last strand of the previous stitch, like this. Now wrap the needle with the yarn, both strands of yarn, and pull it through, creating a new stitch. And do the same thing. That's it. That's the little trick. So you spread the strands, insert the needle into 2 strands, but one of them belongs to the previous stitch and one of them belongs to the current stitch, and knit them. And you go like that, knitting stitch by stitch until you come to this point when you have one full stitch and the one strand of the previous stitch. So basically you have 3 strands on the needle, and you knit them together like this. I'm making a tiny teeny swatch because I don't want to take your time with a bigger one, just to show you how it works. You of course can cast on more than 6 stitches and make a bigger swatch. In purl side rows, you do same thing, but instead of knitting stitches, you purl them. So you bring the yarn to the front, and then you separate 2 strands, go into just one of them, purl it with 2 strands of yarn, and then separate the next stitch, the strands of the next stitch, purl it, separate again, purl it, and keep doing that until you come to 3 strands. 1 full stitch and 1 strand of the previous stitch, just like I have over here on my needle. See, 1 full stitch and the last strand of the previous stitch. I'll grab some more yarn. And I purl all 3 strands together. That's it. That's how it works. So you repeat the knit row and the purl row, and you see the look is much like stockinette, but a bit kind of slanted. So the stitches, every stitch is slanted. That's because we are combining the strands between stitches, and that slanting actually creates a nice texture, and it prevents the stockinette stitch from curling. So let's work for a couple more rows, and then I'll show you how to bind off stitches. Okay, that's the fourth row. So my swatch is growing, and you can see that it doesn't curl. See, it's quite flat. I mean, it's a bit messy, but it's quite flat. If you choose smaller needle, then you might get some curling, not as much as the regular stockinette stitch, and that curling is easier fixed with blocking. But I really recommend not to use smaller needles because the texture, because of that slanting, the texture is more dense than the regular stockinette stitch. See, if I spread the stitches, you can see that it is kind of tighter, and using smaller needle would make it even more dense, and then it won't look nice. So we've done some knitting and purling in this new little tricky technique, and now we are ready to bind off. So to bind off, you basically do the same thing as we did for the knit row. So one strand, we knit it, then we separate strands of the next stitch, knit these two strands together and pass it over. No more secrets, no more tricks, just work in pattern, same knit row as we did just now, and pass one stitch over the other. And then you would have a nice pattern up to the last row, up to the chain of bound off stitches, and that will look nice and consistent. And it won't curl. That's very important for us, right? Okay, here we go. The swatch is ready. All stitches are bound off. You still have that nice chain of stitches like we usually do when we bind off stockinette stitch, but up to the chain, you see all stitches are messy, slanted, because we're using this new little trick. And that's it. A simple trick that changes everything. Now you can use stockinette stitch more often. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned.